Today is just a quick video on some work I've been doing on a loot table for my game, Drone Alone. So here you can see basically a Google Docs sheet, which is like an Excel sheet basically, where I started implementing some test loot tables for generating loot in my game. And basically the way these work is they'll have information based on item IDs, which is in a separate database. So like here, for example, this is my item ID database. And the way it works basically with loot tables is you have recursiveness built into them. So a loot table can be composed of either items or other loot tables basically. And the way this works is they have a name that's not really used, and they have an array of items or loot tables, and they have a probability array for each entry, and then the type. So the type can either be a loot table item, which would just be an item ID, a loot table entry, which would be another loot table, or no loot. And that will be used for probabilities. So let's say for here, there's an entry. This has a probability of 25%, no loot, basically. And then there's just some quantity information, and if the quantities can have decimals, or should they be rounded. And the way this works in game, it looks kind of scary, but it's actually not that bad at all. Basically, it takes in a loot table ID. So let's say the ID of a chest, for example, of a certain type, and it will just go through this. It will check the types for each entry in the loot table. If the entry is another loot table, it recursively does this same function and then appends the results to these temporary arrays that contain the item IDs and the amounts. And then I go through a little bit of math. If it's an item in this entry, I check and see, okay, what's the probability based on the probability entry of having an item or not in this loot table. If it does come back true within, let's say if this value is 0.5, that means it has a 50% chance of having the item. It gets added. If not, it doesn't add it, obviously. There's some math that has to do here when it comes to the deviation. So let's say an item can have 1, 2, 3 of them basically, or can have 500 plus or minus 10, things like that. So that's what this math does here. This just checks to make sure, okay, if it allowed to have decimal values in the amount, it will allow them. If not, it rounds up to 1 basically. And then I just clamp these values between the minimum possible and the maximum float number in the engine, and then add that. If the entry is a no loot, it just does again a probability check, which is just a weighted boolean. And if this value, let's say it was 25%, 25% of the time it's going to return true. So true. So 25% of the time it will be no loot, for example. And then at the very end, once it's done this for each entry within the loot table, it comes back and it checks. So either it gives something or it doesn't, basically based on the no loot probability. And I did a quick test in the game, and it's going to be kind of hard to see because it's going to be up here in this corner. But basically I just created a quick function. When I press F, it generates loot from the loot table, and using the test loot tables I created in the Google Sheets. So here you go, for example. So there I created some carbon, oxygen, some items as well. And this is the same loot table each time that I'm asking to create. Here there was only items, there was no minerals. Here there's some minerals, there's some items. That time, no loot at all. And yeah, so it's pretty simple. I'm very happy because it is working exactly how I wanted it to, which means basically instead of having to scan through the entire item database, and pick out randomly items or things like that with certain conditions, which would require lots and lots of for loops. In this way, I can create loot tables for, basic ore, uncommon ore, rare ore, things like that, basic items, common items. I can make loot tables for specific chests, for example. So a chest at the end of a puzzle will have very specific items compared to just random chests outside of them, basically. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy. This only took a couple hours to do, so that's pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with it. Thanks for watching.